3:47 a.m., somewhere over the western edge of Iranian airspace, 30,000 feet above a desert that has swallowed empires, the most expensive combat aircraft ever built is doing exactly what it was designed to do. Every screen is live, every sensor is feeding data. The avionics suite, the crown jewel of 5 decades of American aerospace engineering, is processing, calculating, confirming. The pilot sees a clean picture. Altitude nominal, velocity nominal, target coordinates locked. Everything is working perfectly. And that is precisely the problem, because somewhere below, in the back of a military truck moving slowly down an unlit road in the dark, a team of engineers is feeding this aircraft a reality that does not exist. Not jamming it, not blinding it, something far more surgical, far more devastating. They are teaching its instruments to lie with the confidence of truth. The coordinates on that screen, constructed. The targeting solution the weapons system just finalized, built on a foundation of phantom mathematics. The pilot has no warning, no alarm, no indication that the most sophisticated navigation architecture money can build has been quietly, invisibly, surgically compromised. This is not science fiction. This is not a war game scenario run in a classified basement in Virginia. According to multiple defense analysts and signals intelligence researchers, this is the operational reality that unfolded in the skies above the Middle East. And the governments involved have very deliberate reasons for keeping its full implications away from you. The age of GPS-dependent air supremacy is not ending. It may have already ended. Stay with me, because what we are going to cover in the next 25 minutes is not a news recap. You will not find this framing on any major network. What you are going to get is a 4-layer analysis, the technical mechanism behind what Iran actually deployed, the strategic doctrine it just shattered, the geopolitical tremors now moving through every defense ministry on Earth, and the economic consequences quietly rippling through a global arms market worth hundreds of billions of dollars. This is the map that mainstream coverage is not drawing for you. If you are new here, this channel exists for one purpose: to show you the architecture of power that operates underneath the headlines, not what happened, why it happened, and what it forces to happen next. Hit subscribe right now, not later, because this story is moving faster than the news cycle can track. And every hour that passes rewrites another assumption that the world has held for 30 years. Let us go. Let us start with the mythology. For 20 years, the F-35 has been sold to the world as the last word in aerial dominance. $100 million per airframe. 5th-generation stealth, sensor fusion architecture that synthesizes radar, infrared, electronic emissions, and communications intercepts into a single coherent tactical picture no previous aircraft could produce. The marketing language used by Lockheed Martin and the United States Department of Defense has been, by any measure, extraordinary, unchallengeable, invincible, the platform that ends air wars before they begin. Israel's variant, the F-35I Adir, was the jewel of that mythology, modified specifically for Israeli operational requirements, integrated with indigenous electronic systems, the instrument that the Israel Defense Forces placed at the absolute center of their regional deterrence architecture. 70 years of air superiority, 7 conflicts, 0 peer competitors in the aerial domain. That is the track record Israel brought into this moment. And that track record is exactly what made the vulnerability invisible. Here is what the defense marketing never emphasized. Beneath the stealth coating, beneath the sensor fusion suite, beneath every revolutionary capability the F-35 genuinely possesses, the entire architecture rests on a single foundational assumption so deeply embedded that most mission planners stopped questioning it years ago. GPS is available, GPS is accurate, GPS is telling the truth. Remove that assumption and the edifice does not crack. It dissolves. Navigation accuracy, gone. Weapons terminal guidance, compromised. Formation coordination protocols, unreliable. Low-altitude terrain following strike profiles, genuinely dangerous to execute. The integrated kill chain that makes the F-35 lethal does not degrade gracefully when GPS is corrupted. It unravels systematically, because every layer of that chain was built on top of the one below it, and the one at the bottom just gave way. This was not a secret. That is the part that should make you uncomfortable. Internal assessments within the United States defense establishment had flagged GPS dependency as a systemic vulnerability for years. The language in those assessments, according to analysts who have reviewed declassified portions, described it as a foundational risk to the entire precision warfare architecture the American military has built since 1991. But public acknowledgement was structurally impossible, because the moment you publicly confirm that GPS denial can neutralize F-35, you do not just have a military problem, you have a market problem. Japan, South Korea, Poland, Taiwan, the United Kingdom, nations that collectively committed to purchasing hundreds of these aircraft. Begin asking questions that no procurement contract can comfortably answer. So the vulnerability stayed classified. The mythology stayed intact, until a team of engineers in the back of a moving truck decided it was time to run the experiment in live operational conditions. The arrogance was not in building the F-35. The arrogance was in believing that the dependency at its foundation would never be found. It was found. And what comes next is the part they are still not telling you. Now we go deep, because understanding what Iran allegedly executed requires you to abandon the mental model most people carry about electronic warfare. The popular imagination pictures jamming as a wall, a signal blocker, something that cuts the connection and triggers an alarm. The pilot knows. The system knows. Emergency protocols activate. What analysts believe Iran deployed is categorically different. And the difference is not technical nuance. The difference is the gap between a lock being broken and a lock being quietly replaced with one that opens for someone else. Announcement number 1, GPS spoofing at operational scale. This is the mechanism that, according to signals intelligence researchers and independent defense analysts, represents the first layer of what Iran activated. Here is the architecture of the attack as it is currently understood. A GPS receiver, military-grade, authentication protocols active, does not simply receive a signal. It verifies it. It checks timing accuracy, signal structure, and a set of authentication parameters designed to distinguish legitimate satellite transmissions from counterfeit ones. The assumption built into that verification system is that producing a counterfeit signal with sufficient fidelity to pass authentication is beyond the technical reach of a sanctioned adversary operating without access to Western microelectronics. That assumption just became a historical artifact. What Iran appears to have developed is a signal generation capability operating in the L1 and L2 frequency bands, the precise frequencies used by military-grade GPS receivers aboard aircraft like the F-35, with timing accuracy and structural fidelity sufficient to defeat that authentication layer. The spoofed signal does not announce itself. The receiver accepts it. The navigation suite continues operating. The weapon systems continue calculating targeting solutions. The aircraft is not blind. It is deceived. And deceived is worse than blind, because a blind pilot knows he cannot see. A deceived pilot is certain he can. Iranian electronic warfare teams, according to analysts reviewing the available evidence, Spauwafan de Berbershim faces for thiefening transmitters across a distributed network of mobile platforms positioned throughout western Iran, eastern Syria, and the Bekaa Valley in Lebanon. The overlapping coverage zone extended deep into Israeli operational airspace. Every F-35 flying a strike corridor through that zone was processing coordinates that had been silently, systematically replaced with phantom mathematics. Precision-guided munitions released inside that zone followed their GPS instructions with perfect fidelity. They struck precisely where they were directed to strike, which was precisely nowhere near the intended target. Announcement number 2, the architecture is mobile, distributed, and functionally indestructible through conventional air attack. This is the element that transforms a tactical problem into a strategic catastrophe. The transmitter platforms are not fixed installations. They are mounted on heavy military vehicles, operating on pre-planned emission schedules that limit their detectable signature windows to minutes at a time. When Israeli signals intelligence attempts to geolocate an active spoofing transmitter, the platform has typically repositioned before a strike mission can be planned, approved, and executed. The cat and mouse dynamic this creates is not a temporary inconvenience. It is a permanent operational constraint. Destroying one node shifts the coverage map slightly. The electromagnetic environment over Israeli airspace, the corrupted GPS bubble that makes F-35 strike operations unreliable, persists. You cannot bomb your way out of a software problem deployed on wheels. But here is the dimension that makes the asymmetry almost impossible to overstate. While Iranian electronic warfare systems were systematically corrupting Israeli GPS data, their own targeting and positioning architecture remained fully operational. Iranian platforms were navigating using Russia's GLONASS constellation and China's Beidou system. They were not touching GPS. They had no reason to. They built their entire operational infrastructure on alternative positioning systems, specifically because they anticipated this moment. Iran was navigating with precision, while Israel was flying inside a constructed illusion. On an active battlefield, that asymmetry is not an advantage. It is a different category of reality entirely. Announcement number 3. This capability did not emerge in a laboratory last year. It is roots that trace back 14 years to a single event that Western intelligence agencies documented, analyzed, classified, and then critically underestimated. 2011. Iranian forces capture a United States RQ-170 Sentinel reconnaissance drone, almost entirely intact. The American government's initial position was mechanical failure, crash landing. Within weeks, it became operationally clear that Iranian engineers had executed a GPS spoofing attack that convinced the drone's navigation system it was approaching its home base in Afghanistan, while it was actually being guided to a soft landing inside Iranian territory. That single captured platform handed Iranian reverse engineering teams direct access to American GPS receiver architecture, the signal processing logic, the authentication threshold parameters, the exact fidelity requirements that military GPS systems used to validate incoming positioning data. They spent the following 14 years building a weapon specifically engineered against those thresholds. Russian technical knowledge of GPS signal structure, Chinese expertise in signal processing and jamming waveform design, Iranian IRGC Electronic Warfare Command's operational experience accumulated across years of testing against American systems operating in the Gulf region. 3 knowledge streams, 1 objective, 14 years of iterative refinement. The result is what flew, or rather what failed to fly as intended, over the Middle East. Here is the conclusion you need to sit with before we move forward. Iran was not supposed to be able to do this. The sanctions architecture that has surrounded Tehran for 3 decades was explicitly designed to prevent the accumulation of precisely this kind of technical capability. Denied access to Western microelectronics, cut off from international defense procurement, economically isolated to the point of strategic impotence. The sanctions did not prevent this. There is a serious argument to be made that the sanctions accelerated it, forced indigenization, forced the development of systems built from first principles, without dependencies on components that could be remotely disabled or architecturally compromised. Iran did not build a GPS denial capability despite the sanctions. Iran built a GPS denial capability that the sanctions made uniquely resilient. And that is a lesson being studied right now in Moscow, in Beijing, in Pyongyang. The question is whether Washington has genuinely internalized what that means. Now, let me show you what is happening in the rooms you are not allowed into. Because the public narrative around this event has been carefully managed. Carefully is the operative word, not suppressed entirely. That is no longer possible in an information environment this fragmented, but managed, shaped. The framing you are receiving through official channels emphasizes operational complexity, challenging environments, ongoing assessments, language designed to communicate without revealing. Here is what the language is designed to conceal. The Rand Corporation, in a declassified assessment that received almost no mainstream coverage, identified GPS dependency as a first-order vulnerability in American and allied fifth-generation aircraft operations as far back as 2019. The specific language used described it as a systemic architectural risk that could be exploited by a sufficiently motivated adversary with targeted investment in electromagnetic spectrum operations, not a fringe analysis, not a dissenting footnote. A formal strategic assessment from the institution that has shaped American defense doctrine for 7 decades. It was noted, it was filed, it was not fixed. Why? Because fixing it publicly meant answering questions from Tokyo, Warsaw, Seoul, and Taipei that the State Department and the Pentagon were not prepared to answer. Nations that had committed tens of billions of dollars to F-35 procurement based on capability guarantees that a public GPS vulnerability acknowledgement would have directly undermined. The arms market does not tolerate doubt, and so doubt was managed rather than resolved. Here is the sentence that a senior defense analyst, speaking without attribution to a European security publication in early 2024, used to describe the internal posture of the American defense establishment on this question. He said, and I am paraphrasing carefully, the vulnerability is understood, the timeline for remediation is real, and the gap between those two facts is where adversaries live. Iran just moved into that gap, and the gap is larger than anyone in an official briefing room is currently prepared to say out loud. So where does this go? I am going to give you 3 paths forward, not speculation. Structured scenario analysis based on the variables currently in motion. Each path has a different probability. Each path has a different cost. And only one of them does not end with a fundamental restructuring of Middle Eastern power architecture. Path 1, the patch. Israel moves fast. The United States provides emergency technical support. Anti-jam GPS receivers using directional antenna technology are rapidly fielded on a portion of the F-35I fleet. Navigation systems are reconfigured to cross-reference GPS data against inertial navigation inputs and terrain reference positioning, creating a redundancy layer that makes spoofing detectable before weapons are released. Some of these upgrades are already in the pipeline. Emergency acceleration becomes the Israeli Air Force's highest technical priority overnight. This path is real. This path is likely in the short term. But here is what the patch does not fix. Full fleet integration of spoofing-resistant architecture runs to years, not months. The F-35I fleet numbers dozens of operational aircraft. Retrofitting each one requires depot-level maintenance cycles, software validation, and operational testing in a GPS-contested environment before any mission commander will trust the upgraded guidance data with a live strike package. During that window, measured in months at minimum, more likely in years, the GPS denial environment that Iran has established over the operational theater persists. Hezbollah is not pausing its rocket campaigns while Israel recalibrates. Iranian-supplied precision weapons continue reaching Israeli territory. The window of degraded Israeli air power is not a diplomatic abstraction. It is a strategic opportunity being actively exploited in real time. The patch buys time. It does not restore the baseline. And time, in this operational environment, is not neutral. Verdict: the patch slows the bleeding. It does not close the wound. Path 2, the escalation trap. Israel, facing sustained operational degradation and compounding domestic political pressure, moves toward direct action against Iranian electronic warfare infrastructure. American support is requested. The logic is straightforward. Destroy the transmitter network. Restore GPS reliability. Recover air superiority. The logic is also precisely what Iranian strategic planners may have been designing toward. Consider the geometry. The transmitter platforms are mobile. There is no single facility to strike, no command center whose destruction collapses the network. Meaningful degradation of the GPS denial capability requires sustained strikes across multiple locations inside Iranian territory, inside Syrian territory, inside Lebanese territory simultaneously. That is not a surgical operation. That is a regional war with a minimum of 3 active fronts opening in parallel. And the moment American forces are directly engaged in kinetic operations against Iranian infrastructure, Every proxy network Tehran has spent 20 years building and positioning activates inside a framework that transforms a localized conflict into a theater-wide conflagration. This is not a trap that snaps shut suddenly. It is a trap that closes slowly, incrementally, with each escalatory step feeling locally rational, while the strategic picture deteriorates globally. Washington understands this geometry, which is why the current American administration is visibly, almost ostentatiously, reluctant to commit forces at the scale this path requires. Verdict: the escalation trap is real. The door is open, and the pressure to walk through it is building with every aborted Israeli strike mission. Path 3, the doctrine collapse. This is the path no official spokesperson will discuss. This is the path that gets spoken about in the kind of language that requires significant translation before it reaches public consumption. Israel cannot sustain GPS-degraded air operations indefinitely against an adversary that is maintaining offensive pressure through systems specifically designed to be immune to the GPS denial environment. The political cost of mission aborts accumulates faster than the technical fixes can be implemented. The Israeli war cabinet faces a population and a political establishment conditioned by 7 decades of rapid, decisive military results to expect resolution, not recalibration. If the patch is too slow and the escalation trap is too dangerous, the remaining path is the one that rewrites the foundational document. Israeli military doctrine, built explicitly around air power as the great equalizer for a small nation without strategic depth, enters a mandatory revision process that no amount of political will can accelerate past the pace of operational reality. Ground operations become more central. Deterrence calculations against Hezbollah, against Syrian-based Iranian logistics networks, against the broader regional architecture that Israel has managed through air-centric forward deterrence, all require renegotiation from a position of demonstrated reduced capability. And reduced capability, once demonstrated in live operational conditions, does not stay secret. It propagates into the calculations of every actor in the region who has been deterred not by Israeli ground forces, but by the credible threat of precise, overwhelming air power arriving without warning. Deterrence is not a weapon. It is a belief. And beliefs, once shaken, do not simply reset when the technical problem is resolved. Verdict: this is the path that permanently alters the map, not with a single dramatic event, but with the slow, irreversible accumulation of a world that has seen the myth tested and found it wanting. 3 paths, different timelines, different costs, but all 3 converge on the same underlying reality. The strategic environment that existed before that F-35 processed its first spoofed coordinate is gone. What replaces it is still being written, and the authors include actors who, until very recently, were not supposed to have a pension such. Here is the principle that history keeps trying to teach us, and that great powers keep refusing to learn. The most dangerous vulnerability is never the one your adversary cannot find. It is the one you have decided is too expensive to fix. Iran did not defeat the F-35 with a superior aircraft. Iran did not defeat it with a larger military budget, with more sophisticated manufacturing, with decades of aerospace engineering tradition. Iran defeated it by identifying the single load-bearing assumption underneath 30 years of Western air power doctrine and investing with surgical patience in the one capability that assumption could not survive contact with. Control the electromagnetic environment, and you control what your enemy believes is real. Control what your enemy believes is real, and you control the battlefield without firing a single missile. That is not an Iranian insight. That is a timeless principle of strategic competition that the most expensive air force in human history just relearned at extraordinary cost. Now I want to hear from you. If a sanctioned, isolated nation could execute this against the most advanced Western combat platform ever exported, den zijn beetje sprein en deentjes en zijn leisures en frein en rischain. What happens when a nation with 10 times the industrial capacity and 20 times the defense budget runs the same playbook over the Taiwan Strait? Leave your analysis in the comments. The most important conversation about this is not happening on television. It is happening here. Subscribe, because the next chapter of this story will not wait.